Hi everyone, welcome to the official launch of Crown Records Management's Digital Transformation podcast series. My name's Kevin Widdop, Digital Transformation Sales Lead here at Crown Records Management. Really excited to have Dr. Nick Barrett, Senate House Library Director from the University of London, of course, as our official launch guest. Nick, thanks very much for coming on the show and welcome.
Thanks, Kevin. It's lovely to be here.
Excellent. So to kick off then, the world is changing. People and students more specifically want more and different things from not just their university experience, but I imagine from their library experience as well. Can you explain how the Senate House Library is trying to provide that service?
Well, I think the first point is that libraries have been seen as very conservative, and change is often seen as dangerous or risky. The job is to protect and preserve our stock and portray it in very traditional ways on shelves, books, print. That world is going. There's still a bit of it left, and I'll maybe come back to that, but the way students expect more bangs for bucks, given the amount they're paying, we have to respond to that. And the means of delivery is increasingly digital, particularly around journal articles. The print journal is dead. We've got lots of material, no one ever asks for it. It's all about instant access to digital content on demand from wherever you are in the world, and libraries have to really recognise and adapt to that new marketplace.
Yeah, it's a real challenge. I can think back to when I was at university just over 10 years ago now. It seems a while ago, 20, 30 years ago when my dad was at university, but I can only imagine what millennials these days, born digital students, demand. Can you perhaps in a nutshell just explain the evolution of those changes?
Well, firstly, I'm terrified by the fact that I was probably at university at the same time as your dad. So that was the first wake-up call for me there. But in that sense, just looking at my own institution at the moment, Senate House Library looks and feels the same now in terms of its layout and stock as it did when I was there in the 1980s, 1990s. So that's, I think, a really interesting conundrum. We look and feel like the way people expect a library to behave. And there is something in that. The psychology of setting foot into a library space, and this has been tested, makes students far more productive. They want to congregate and come together to share ideas and be creative and to discuss and to collaborate. Yet they still expect to get content from wherever they may well be. So the role of the library is now at the heart of the student experience, which is fantastic for us, and that's consistently confirmed in all the NSS scores. However, what a library does and how it surfaces that content has to evolve and it has to change, because students are going to get that stuff from anywhere, not necessarily the library content or the library catalogue on the website. They're going to get to Google or wherever and find it that way. And they also want that format to be more agile in the way they use and reuse it to link back into the learning platforms that they're working with. So it's a very interesting challenge. The way we're tackling that is to look at what stock we need and to make sure that we're focusing some of our research collections. And I think that's one of the unique challenges of being the director of Senate House Library. We sit in the middle of a federal structure and we have 18 different federal institutions and all of their students coming through our doors. So we need to just be aware that they have their own collections, often much larger than ours. How do we add value to what we do?
Really interesting. You talk there, it's a nice segue actually to my next question, which is about key challenges. I'm just sitting here thinking, wow, your position has so much to it in this digital first world. Is there one key thing that's keeping you up at night?
Money. I think all librarians would say they're under pressure for money. I'd probably reposition that. I think it's more about value. Money is always tight in higher education, and especially so for libraries. There's a pressure to make your acquisitions budget go further, particularly the way some of the prices are rising at rapid inflationary rates. Journal acquisition in digital format, 10-15% price rises each year. So I think there's a wider conversation around the fact that the market is broken for us. But in terms of value, I think it's value back to the students. And for me, value back to those federal members. What can we do as a central library that perhaps those individuals' libraries can't do? And for me, it's around looking at our collective stock. Can we do something around developing our collections so that they are more concise and sharply defined, and also make it more about the student journey, which of course any student-facing service should be about. How do we take students around those different collections or surface them digitally? So in one sense, it doesn't really matter which part of the picture they're going to. They get what they want as quickly as possible. And the answer there is digital again.
Yeah, well, it's certainly music to my ears as a digital transformation sales lead. Just to touch on the third-party storage facility and the service that Crown Records Management offer to the Senate House Library and the University of London. Could you perhaps, for anybody who isn't aware out there of our relationship, can you perhaps give a little bit of an overview as to what that involves?
Well, 3 years ago, there was a need to remove about 7,500 linear metres of stock from our central London base at Senate House in Bloomsbury for a physical transformation project, which the library was forced to respond to. And I think it's fair to say that this wasn't necessarily our first choice. But actually, in looking at our storage needs, it's made us sit up and look at partnership working in a very different way. And having worked with Crown to find a storage solution, it's made us think around where we keep all the other pieces of the storage collection. We have about 13,000 linear metres in the Tower. Now this is prime real estate in the heart of London, and it's being used for storing books. Now whilst that means we can retrieve very quickly, is it the most effective use of space? Can we do more with all of those floors to provide better student services, a range of different student services? For example, can we provide a digital scholarship area so people can play with the latest kit and be really creative? Can we get interpreters in to look at our collections through public engagement, which is a really important part of the higher education mission? So I think by looking at this storage solution and working in partnership with Crown, it's really woken us up to the potential of our physical space. And also I think it's allowed us to think and dream big and what we could do as a federation. Out there in the wider library world, there's a lot of talk of national monograph strategy, a research reserve where we don't need to keep as many multiple copies on multiple sites. Can we bring collections together and keep a fewer number, but therefore by aggregating our collections have a richer pool of resources? And the London federal structure, I think, is a really good opportunity to do that. Now, we'd obviously need a shared depository, and I think that's where some of the conversations that we've been talking around are coming together. So it's a very exciting time to be looking at this question.
So in terms of rising expectations in the university sector, do you have any best practice advice for perhaps people who are in a similar position to yourselves, looking at their stock and thinking, wow, what do we do with this?
I think there are a few key suggestions I would make. Firstly, don't get forced into a position where you have to make a decision. Plan now. Plan for 3, 5, 10 years down the line. Make sure you do really know what your users are doing. There have been a number of studies where researchers have gone out and said to academics and students, what do you want? And the answers coming back have been, we want print stock. That's how we work. That's what a traditional academic needs. And then we look at usage stats. And where there's been a comparison between the e-book and the print book, the e-book has multiple uses. So what people tell you aren't necessarily what they're doing. And that's, I think, a really important thing. Be armed with the data. Make sure you know what you're talking about. But really importantly, collaborate. I can't stress that enough. And it sounds like one of those, nice and easy management terms, collaborate. But if we are going to crack this storage solution, if we're going to get better value out of our purchase budgets, we need to recognise that we can't continue to do things in isolation. There are lots of groups forming up across the country, regional consortia, where I think we are beginning to start to understand more about overlaps, collection strengths, and so we can make those decisions not in isolation, but working together with professionals who work in the same industry. And I don't think there's been enough of that. So that's, I think, the next stage past the collaboration. I think the other thing is look beyond the confines of your institution. It's very easy to just simply respond to higher education initiatives, and we are part of a much bigger sector that sits outside of HE as well. The library world is changing, and I think we're in a good position to drive that change. So look at the potential beyond, and don't be afraid to voice that in your higher education institution. We are those drivers of change, not the receivers of change.
Yeah, it's really important from our perspective as well to, to not just to participate in the conversation, the digital conversation, but to drive that conversation. The word that stuck out there in my head, in my mind, was data. We hear data breaches these days can destroy a reputation overnight. Is a data breach on your horizon? Are those conversations that you have in your role?
Well, we are all about data, and I think it depends on how you define data: knowledge, data, information, mass data, collection linkage. I think you can do some really amazing things once the data is there. If you talk to a librarian, they'll say metadata, which is more about how you identify, make accessible, and therefore bring people into your collections. But in terms of the new landscape, a lot of the definition of a library is around its special collections or its unique collections. And of course, we're wrestling with the challenge of born digital. We look after the university archives, the memory of the institution, and of course that's being generated in born digital format. So we need to be absolutely on the money when it comes to GDPR and freedom of information requests. And so that sense, yes, a lot of compliance. Data breaches, we have 45,000+ individual members, and so we need to make sure that their data is secure. We've got an accurate takedown policy. We delete and destroy records when we need to. This is all part and parcel of what we do. But of course, that's an increasingly expanding role for a team or an individual. And as with many institutions, we might not be the best placed to take that piece of work forward. So, as with all other things, we would look to professionals outside of our particular institution to provide that solution.
Excellent. In terms of this buzzword, digital transformation, just moving off slightly from the conversation around data and expectations and mindsets, what does digital transformation mean to you? It's a hashtag that's bandied around here, there and everywhere.
It's how we go from one to few to one to many in the way that we push out our content, our services, our education packages, so that when we reach a much larger audience. The transformation, I think, is partly stock and format, but I think it's also a mindset. And I think it's all about the way we try and provide and deliver services to a much broader range of people. There's a lot being said around digital humanities, as though that's somehow separated from the rest of the humanities. For me, I find that really unhelpful. Every subject area needs to think digital first, and so digital scholarship is a much better way of thinking about things. So that's another part of the transformation. It's about transforming the way we approach subject areas so that we can make sure we've got the right set of resources and the right set of skills to enable the millennial researcher. And that's a really interesting cultural change within the organisation, within the sector.
And that's the millennial researcher. What are the characteristics of the millennial researcher?
You may not see them. I think that's a really important point. It might sound a bit fatuous, but you may not see them. They are going to be there engaging with you, but in a very different way. And so it's important to recognise that in the way that you set your stall out. And a lot of libraries use a website to bring people on site, and there's a finite amount of space. I see that as the other way around. Your web platform, as opposed to your website, your platform, your range of different layers of content and service and skills should be the main business model. And if you then have people coming on site, that's the value add. So it's inverting the whole library model. So it has to be digital first. Now, that doesn't mean to say that we're continually going to respond to the way millennials engage with technology. And I think that's a really important role for libraries. It's to encourage better practice as well. So if people are coming to our platforms from different search engines, once they are there, that's our opportunity to then take them by the hand and lead them through a whole series of gateways where they are skilled up and think about how they can perhaps research more effectively to get more out of the content we're providing. So I think that's a really useful conversation with the sector and with the way that we start looking at how we surface content and also those skills, because it is going to feel very different.
Really, really interesting. So I'm thinking there, obviously you've talked about data. I've got friends who are data scientists, and if you can't see essentially your customer, how are you harnessing the data, or how are you having that conversation with your end user in order to improve that experience?
Well, I think there are two things. One, we do have some data. We have the data analytics of their behaviours, and people's behaviours are fantastic. Libraries do this with eye tracking technology of wayfinding as people move around the physical space, but I think we're using quite a lot of the data analytics of how websites are used and stay rates and linkage follows. That in many ways is the digital equivalent of wayfinding around a physical space. So we're beginning to understand a lot more about behaviours. But just as these days the user experience will be co-produced with your user and your professionals, so too the digital environment, and we have to be responsive to what people want, and that's where that data analysis comes in. But like I also said, we also need to then encourage what we see as best practices as professionals in this sector. So the role of the traditional library employment base is also going to have to shift as we bring in more data scientists and digital transformation managers and tech builders who can start to tweak and change these platforms to make them a lot more conducive to how digital behaviour needs to be responded to, but also changed and challenged as well.
In terms of a digital transformation agenda, are there some key projects that you've got in mind that students, the wider public can look forward to?
I think the first one is spending 3 years, I know I said we were conservative, but it's going to take that long, to see what we can do as a federation. We've got some very large, effectively universities out there, King's College London, University College London, I could name all 18. And we are still at the very beginnings of seeing how we can work more collaboratively, more federally together. So we want to spend a year evaluating our collections. What actually have we got? Then we can start to map them out and see those overlaps or collection strengths. And that's when we can, I think, really start to meaningfully have discussions around future development strategy, a common storage approach, and this whole really exciting idea of creating a digital library for the Federation, for the rest of the world. I think that's one part of it. But also, we are starting to wrestle with Born Digital and look at how our special collections requirements are going to change. Not just because we know that there is this whole institutional memory that's coming down the track as Born Digital, but the way we as people create our digital selves and our digital outputs in very different ways. The way we have a multiplicity of platforms instead of the traditional academic working papers in their attic or in their cellar or in their room, which are often deposited en masse, which are then catalogued. We're going to have very different footprints and profiles around the digital landscape. And I think what will be fascinating to see how we can provide tools and storage solutions to start to ingest that, not necessarily now, but 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line. It's like I was saying, let's start thinking through those problems now and create the solutions rather than wait for them to hit us and have to then respond and scramble a less effective solution together. So I see libraries at the cutting edge of information management, information storage, and information surfacing for the digital future.
Wow, and just finally, thinking about that digital future, what about a digital legacy for Dr. Nick Barrett at the Senate House Library and the University of London? If you could leave a legacy of sorts in a digital footprint, what would that look like?
Well, firstly, it would be establishing Senate House Library, not Dr. Nick Barrett. It's not about me, it's about the library. The library comes first. But I think the way I'd like Senate House Library to move is, again, challenging how we reach audiences. A fantastic digital collection with a range of digital tools to help people explore it, to create and co-produce and then add to that. But it shouldn't just be for the narrow higher education market. If you look at the University of London's founding principles, it's to provide education at higher standards to everybody, irrespective of class, colour, creed, at a global level. The library should be at the forefront of that. And I think we can then make education truly democratic and also truly valuable. And it has to be via those digital tools.
Nick Barrett, our very first guest here on the Crown Records Management Digital Transformation podcast series. Thanks very much.
Thank you.